Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Elliott, the editor-in-chief of Geektown, and today we're going behind the scenes on The Residence with two of the talented minds from Crafty Apes, John Nelson, VFX supervisor, and Brendan Nelson, creative director. No relation. They helped bring the show to life, all while making it look completely invisible. Their work on the series has also been recognized by the Visual Effects Society, earning nominations for Outstanding Supporting Visual Effects in a Photoreal episode, Outstanding Environment in an Episodic, Commercial, Game Cinematic or Real-Time Project, and Outstanding Composition and Lighting in an Episode. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be exploring the challenges, surprises, and creative decisions that made up this invisible effects work or made it all possible. Let's dive in. So welcome to both of you, John and Brendan. To you all, when did you realize that the VFX had to be invisible to support the storytelling for this?
Well, I think from the very start of the show, when we first started learning about it, because it had to be seamless and could not pull the audience away, because the audience had to stay close attention to all the clues that were being given throughout the show, whether it's through dialogue or set decoration or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we knew everything just had to feel grounded and real, so nothing was ever distracting. There's a lot of stuff going on in these frames where we have like an entire cutaway view of a dollhouse. There are key moments that if the audience is really paying attention or even goes back and rewatches an episode, that they can kind of clue in on and sort of be part of the story depending on where they're looking in frame. So our goal is to show those moments but not have anything about work we're doing be distracting in any way.
And the other part of it, I think, is that there was such an iconic building, in the show, and it's the White House. So if it didn't match what your eyes were used to seeing, that would have totally pulled, again, the audience out of the scene. So having such an iconic character in there, reinforced the idea that we had to be grounded in reality. And, we did that with floor plans, working with Francois Adouy as the production designer, mapping out what he wanted the White House to be looking like and what era the White House was going to be from. So there was a lot of work and planning to be grounded in the reality of it, to the point of like the species of trees and where they were located on the lawn.
Wow.
Yeah, everything in the White House has like a very specific historical value, and that all had to be represented at every given time. And everyone has like an iconic image in their head of what the White House looks like, both during the daytime and at night, which a lot of our sequences take place in. So it's like figuring out how to represent that to make it instantly recognizable, but realistic and not distracting is part of what we did.
And that was pushed further outside of the grounds of the White House too, because the streets surrounding it are pretty iconic as well. Since you're always seeing pictures of the White House or helicopter fly-arounds, you'll see the Hay Adams Hotel across the street, which again is another story point to the show. But all of the grounds around it had to be grounded in reality as well.
Yeah, it is one of those shows that, you don't think about the VFX at all. Is there an example of a shot where you knew the audience would just never notice the work, but took an enormous amount of effort to get it right?
I'll speak for one of the shots that we had a couple of them, but we call them the boom down shots, where we start in one room, whether it's the red room or the green room, and we boom down to the basement, or we boom down to another room on the ground floor. And I think those were multiple cameras stitched together, combined with the CG of the dollhouse inner structures and stuff, to be able to have these cutaways where the camera could magically go through a floor. I think, just looking at it, a lot of people think that's just something that we just did on set and filmed practically.
Yeah. Anything else comes to mind?
Yeah, and I think, that we have a broad range of types of shots in this project. Ones that the audience is sort of like getting a look at the White House from a different perspective that they've never seen it before. but like some of the challenging shots to get right were the ones where the White House was just a background character in a scene where you have dialogue going on in the foreground, and making sure that that looked 100% seamless was a challenge in itself, right? Because um, there's no reason to be looking at it in the shot other than it just being a set extension.
Yeah.
So,
Where in the show did you deliberately hold back artistically, because pushing it further may have broken that illusion of the, you know, whether it's the set design or you know, adding the VFX in?
I mean, I'm not sure if we ever really pulled back creatively, because the whole thing in my mind was one of the more creative shows that I've worked on, with trying to build the dollhouse view or the game board view, figuring out what goes in between the walls, and trying to marry that with what production built, and making those two worlds live together, to me was not only a technical task but a creative task in figuring out how to make that blended seamlessly.
yeah, and I think it's like you know, the White House is a real location with real rooms, and the on-set production team did an incredible job of like recreating those as sets, like from everything down to the style of lighting and the color temperature of the lights and the wallpaper and everything. So our job was to like recreate that as realistically as possible so we could merge it with the plate photography. But at the same time, we had to sort of creatively invent the parts of the White House that have no photographic reference, like what does the inside of a White House wall look like when it is cut away? What is in between walls? Is there plumbing in there? Is there insulation in there? That sort of thing, I think, was falling on us to kind of come up with creative solutions for how to present that wasn't, you know, unattractive, but not distracting, but still kind of stayed true to all the story points. I think there are other things in the show, you know, that require creative solutions, and one of them that comes to mind is like the beginning of episode 2 of the season opens with CG Falcon flying around the White House grounds. You know, it is the Falcon's view and perspective that is seeing these key story points happening at the beginning of the episode. And you know, there were conversations about, you know, how do we represent this Falcon's view? Where one point we were talking about, you know, Falcon vision, right? Like how does a Falcon actually see stuff? Are we going to apply some sort of treatment to it? But I think ultimately it was the right call to not do any of that and just kind of present it as if it was photographed. So jumping back and forth between what should have been like a third person perspective of the shot and the Falcon's POV wasn't like a jarring transition for the audience.
Brandon, can you talk a little bit about the collaboration needed between the sort of camera, production design, and visual effects to plan out and fully realize those dollhouse shots, both the wide views and the top-down angles?
Yeah, well, I'll throw this one to John. And John was our on-set VFX supervisor.
Sure.
He was there coordinating and planning all of this from the start.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically working with everyone, you know, the heads of department of production, you know, whether it was Paul William Davies, who's the showrunner, Paula Hedbro, who was the first DP, Peter Deming, who was the second half show's DP, the director Liza Johnson, and the second director Jafar Mahmood, and of course the production designer Francois. We worked closely hand in hand with them and what their vision was for the White House. You know, early on, before I think all the sets were even built, we were doing previs of you know, what these camera paths were going to be in each of the first 2 shots of the first episode, where they were just one big oneer. It was 5 cameras or 6 cameras eventually stitched together, but that was planned with you know, the directors and the showrunner well before stages were built and cameras were, you know, in production. So you know, it was basically a hand in hand workflow with them.
Right.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
it's always a discussion it's a back and forth at those early stages, right? Like we can do a pre-visualization of sort of the showrunner's creative intent for how this camera moves through the White House, and then that dictates how the sets need to be constructed to sort of facilitate shooting those individual pieces. And then if that all coordinates correctly, then we do our job at the end, which is then to actually take all the photograph pieces and stitch them back together to match what the original creative intent of the previs was. And I think those are some of the most challenging shots that we did, were combining all those separately photographed locations into feel like it's one seamless environment inside the White House.
Yeah, and I think I that's a good point, Brandon. I think I missed this, that the stage was split up, the set was split up into 5 stages, because there was no one stage that could actually build the White House, from top to bottom and in depth.
Sure.
The state floor was one stage. That was one of the larger stages we had. But then each of the other floors, the basement, were broken up in different sections. And it was, part of the pre-production with the directors and the DPs and the showrunner was helping them visualize how we can connect these cameras through these different stages that were on the different parts of Raleigh studios. And so, we helped dictate what the camera height should be, and how quickly we're going to walk through this, and help time out a lot of these things, because they were all unknown until we were there the day of and shooting, if we didn't do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Were there shots, John, that you approached and sort of found on the paper, on the page, and thought, oh, well, this should be quite simple, and then it turns out to be deceptively complex when you actually get to it?
Because of how big the whole show was, and throughout all the episodes, that we had to have this consistent asset or this consistent character, that just the data throughput was going to be sort of a something we had to solve and figure out, and that a lot of that stuff was the difficulties that we ran into it, because we knew going in that we had to basically have the ability to put a camera anywhere we needed to in the White House. And I think that maybe one of the most difficult things that took a while for us to solve was, in the very beginning, we had to do this time lapse effect, of the guests coming in, or the people bringing the party supplies coming in, and it was trying to figure out how to make the time lapse of the tree leaf movement look realistic, and figuring out, because we have very traditional ways to do wind, but there's no really like cut and dry way to do time lapse on a tree. And so we had to basically go through many different iterations, and working with the client to figure out what exactly they wanted to see, and how much of their attention they wanted to pull from what was happening with the people going in to the leaves moving, could be a distraction. So I think that was probably one of the more difficult ones that we didn't expect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then just like going back to the massive scale of what our asset was, and sort of what John just touched on, it's like being able to photograph the White House from any angle in CG was a huge undertaking. Like everything from the exterior, with all the trees and foliage and grass for the entire grounds, the full exterior of the White House, all the surrounding streets, and then every single room inside the White House is a fully realized CG copy of the White House, both inside and out. Not only that, but also being modular enough that you can slice off the facade and open it up to see inside too. So, yeah. And I think some of the more deceptively complex shots are definitely the ones where we start inside, following the actors walking in a very intimate space, like an elevator that's very small, and then transitioning through the rooms of the White House and all the way out to the exterior. Just from a sort of practical lighting and compositing and rendering standpoint, your camera is traveling over a great distance, and as it travels, like revealing more and more complex assets as it goes, and sort of bridging the lighting between all the plate photography that has to go in between all those pieces with the CG while maintaining, the sort of recognizable look of everything is the trickiest part.
And let's not forget the camera lens and film back changing as we're transitioning from one camera to the next. And so to make that look so it's not as jarring to the audience, that took a lot of figuring out how we would achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Like if you're starting on an interior on a 50 mil lens that has like a nice shallow depth of field for your actors as they're doing a walk and talk towards camera, that same lens isn't gonna be as an attractive view for the exterior shot of a White House that's supposed to be like a drone sort of perspective, right? So transitioning and making that disguised to the audience so they don't feel that lens change happening is tricky as well.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about the sort of different shots and stuff, what's the hardest part about keeping things like the Dollhouse shots from feeling cinematic as opposed to sort of a technical exercise?
Yeah, I think that goes back to just the level of realism we put into the assets that we built, which was based on the production design as well. Like, it's a real functioning building that people live and work in. So it needs to feel lived in, right? Like it can't just be this like sort of sterile CG representation. It also wouldn't really work for the tone of the show to represent it as like a architectural blueprint visualization either, because you're meant to see action going on. So if you're seeing the action taking place inside the rooms need to feel realistic and lived in the first place. So we definitely didn't, and we're never directed to have it be like a graphic representation. It always needed to feel realistic and lived in.
And that just goes into the detail on top of detail, so what we like to call infinite detail essentially is what sells the realism and makes it feel like a real structure. Knowing the outside of the White House is going to be cement or some sort of concrete, but the inside walls, are going to have more wood features to it, and putting those all together, I think helps sells it as, more of a cinematic thing than a architectural rendering or some sort of like that.
Yeah, and if you look at the amount of detail that's in the Dollhouse shot, for example, I think there were elements in there that ended up surprising me in the finals as well. Like I remember reviewing one of the final versions for that shot and being like, "What is that in the background of this one shot?" And like, turns out there's a dog like laying down in one of the rooms. I was like, I did not know there was a dog in there.
Yeah, and all those things where we had probably between the game board and a Dollhouse view, we had probably about 7 or 8 Easter eggs in there that were, they were story points that happened later in the show, but they were happening right in front of you in the first, 10 minutes of the show. But the audience wouldn't know unless they really dug deep into that. And the dog is being one of them. There's a whole scene where the dog is barking when that intruder comes in, and that's a story point when I think his name was Doombay. They were following him around, and trying to figure out if he was the killer. And this dog, was a point of the story where he was just barking, and he ran out of the room and scurried out. But we had that in the Dollhouse view, and the camera went right by it, and you would never even really, the audience probably never even saw it. We even had other ones on the 3rd floor, in the basement. So there's quite a bit that was happening there.
Wow. Sticking with the Dollhouse stuff, how do you prevent the Dollhouse shots from being more like architectural visualization instead of narrative storytelling?
I think that kind of goes into what we just answered about mostly, yeah, making all the rooms feel realistic and lived in for the most part.
I mean, we had about, I think 160 digital doubles in there, including a dog. So there's a lot of life in there. There's a lot of things happening. There was a woman putting lipstick on in one of the shots, so there that kept it alive, and I think that part of it, took it away from being an ArchViz render type thing.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
real of every room has like a different style of lighting and light bulb, which affects the color temperature. Like the basement where the kitchen is all lit with fluorescent cooler lighting, and the dining rooms have more, warm incandescent lighting. Like pulling back and seeing all those separate spaces, I think also defined by their lighting temperature, helps a lot because you are sort of trained just by living in the world to like recognize those types of spaces by how they are typically lit. It really helps you identify all the different locations by their color palette too.
Mhm. Yeah, that does really make sense. For both of you, really, what was, other than the stuff we talked about, the most technically difficult Dollhouse shot for you?
Well, in the show there was only one dollhouse shot, so the whole shot itself was technically very difficult. Because of limitations being on set and having the stages on the sets on different stages, we had to break up all these cameras and stitch them together and make it feel like just one single camera that went through the whole White House to help tell a story. And Paul William Davies, he really loved the dollhouse, and the showrunner really loved the dollhouse and the game board view because it showed, gave the audience a visual of where all these rooms were, so they knew when they were doing all the interviews and all the different walk and talks in the hallways, the audience knew where they were in the White House, and that was very important to him. And the first dollhouse, the only dollhouse shot, was really to show us, more geography of the White House, so the audience knew exactly, how someone could walk through and get from one room to the next.
Yeah, and for anyone that's watching this that hasn't seen the show, yeah, there are three sort of major, well, four actually major sort of cutaway views we see. Like the shot John is describing now is the camera literally starts on the north lawn of the White House, travels across the lawn, goes in the front door, turns, goes through the ballroom, finds a staircase, and then weaves its way all the way through, witnesses a murder that's just been committed, and then the camera pulls out on the other side of the White House, and onto the South Lawn. So, yeah, stitching all of those locations with all the plate photography in between was a massive undertaking. The dollhouse view itself was very technically challenging because you're essentially, every room is a CG environment. So at any point in time, you have 20 CG environments on screen. So managing that internally, breaking stuff up into separate renders and things like that, kind of coming up with internally to manage the data throughput management of that stuff.
And with all the people that we had in there, that there was a dinner party that was happening at that time, and Kylie Minogue was doing a song, and all the dinner party was watching, and we had to recreate digitally the guests, whether it was their dresses or their hairstyles or ethnicities. We had to make sure everyone that was there we could re-represent through a digital double character. And that started with scanning a bunch of the actresses and actors the day of that scene being filmed, and we brought them in. We brought a scanning truck in and brought each of them in there and got them all digitally scanned. And so, yes, there was definitely a lot of complexity in that dollhouse shot.
Mm. Can we talk a little bit about the research and planning that went into the creation of the Photoreal Falcon as well? You mentioned sort of seeing from the Falcon's point of view, but that was shown in hero camera views throughout the sort of series. So talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I think the first part of it, the a lot of times when we have to do a creature or a bird, someone just does like, we just need you to make a falcon, and we go through some look dev and iterations, and we come up with a falcon. One of the biggest first on difficulties we had was we had to make a falcon because they actually hired a Sager falcon to come on set so they can get a falcon on production cameras and film for a few shots. This became a little bit more difficult because a lot of the shots were shallow depth of field and the Falcon kept on moving, so we can never really get the shot we wanted. But it did make it into a few of the shots. So what we had to do was digitally recreate a real life Falcon, from the patterns on the body to how the wings looked and how big the wings to the face. And I think that was one of the early on difficulties. And we also had to make it so that it could sit perched and also fly and also launch. So all these things, a lot of times we're just doing a bird flying. We're not doing all these things all together in one, character rig and with a feather system. That brings me to the next point is we had to internally create a whole new workflow and pipeline to support the realism needed for this particular Falcon. And we moved into whole new software to start building it. So a lot of the difficulties also was learning and getting up to speed to where we needed to be to produce the output that we did.
Wow.
Yeah, the first shot of episode 2 opens with the camera focused on a view of the White House, and the reveal there is that you're looking at the reflection of the White House in the Falcon's eye. So not only did we have to build the bird to perform all these different storytelling tasks, but the level of detail needed to hold up so close to camera, micro details around the eye and sclera and cornea and stuff, as the camera pulls out to reveal that you're actually looking at the reflection in the eye, was one of the bigger difficulties, just because it needed to be so photoreal and so close up. I think it turned out great in the end, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes into a bird. Like, doesn't need to just flap its wings, like as it's flying and gliding through the air and maybe not even moving that much. All the feathers need to sort of ripple and move in the air, because if those feathers aren't moving, then it just kind of looks like a static posed bird, and that doesn't feel very realistic. It doesn't feel like it's interacting with the air that it's moving through. So designing those feather systems to also include all of the wind blowing through the feathers was a big undertaking.
And we also had the extra scrutiny of having a birder grade our work as well. So we had another level that we had to go through for animation and realism and accuracy that we don't normally have to go through. So, that made us have to perform at the highest level.
Wow. Yeah.
It's sort of a curse, but sort of a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because like you have somebody who is more familiar with the Falcon than anyone in the world to direct you into creating the most realistic Falcon, and not in the world, but as realistic as we can get it to look.
Yeah, and it was nice. So once we nailed it, and the birder agreed with our animations, then that was kind of the final say, and the showrunner was happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot going on to that. So last question for you. What was your favorite part about being part of this project? John, first.
I mean, for me, it's being on set, working with production, and helping bring the vision they have to life, and figuring out a way to help them shoot it so that we can then take all that data and film and make it these dollhouse views and the game board view, which we haven't really touched on, which is sort of similar to the dollhouse view, and even to the Falcon. So for me, it was being part of the whole thing. So from the beginning with the creative and to the end, getting the final renders out. and getting the final approvals to seeing on the screen. So the whole process to me has been, rewarding, and, it was a lot of stress and a lot of late nights, but that, we have a lot of great work to show for it. And we had an amazing team. I mean, I think, that's one of the biggest things that, it's just me, Brandon, sitting here, but behind that is a huge team at Crafty Apes that put this together, whether they're the animators in Atlanta or our comp and lighting teams in Vancouver, or locally the supervisors and artists that we have in Los Angeles. We wouldn't be able to get the work done without them. We might have all these concepts and great ideas and, all this, scans and pictures from on set, but without them, we would never been able to do it.
Yeah.
And that's probably the, it's not always we get to work on something fun and creative, but also have, a fantastic looking product at the end of it. So, it was great to have all these artists have such a rewarding work that they can show and have part of their lives.
Yeah, and I think too, it was a large variety of types of work. I think that was my favorite part about the project. Like, you've got full CG environments, CG set extensions, live action integration. You've got the digital creature, and all that needs to live in this sort of unified world together. So, yeah, it was never a dull moment, because there was always sort of a little piece of like this whole visual effects grab bag to work on, and keep you engaged and interested in the project. And it's like sometimes we work on projects where the shot we're executing is just a line in the script that is like, now a car explodes or something, where this was like fully everything had to serve the story, literally on screen at all times. So that was pretty cool to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, it's been lovely chatting with both of you. Thank you for sharing all your insights into it. I absolutely adored the show. It was fantastic. I wouldn't have thought there was that much VFX work in it, but it means you did your job well.
Yeah.
That's everything we have time for today. Thank you for joining us.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.